everyone to HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm Kevin McPherson. It is still morning. It's Monday. We're kicking the week off. We're kind of on commitment watch, I think. I still believe that. I got another source that's weighing on the Egor Ryzhov to Arkansas. We're calling it a scenario for now. In the past, we talk about commitments that are made and getting the paperwork done and proceeding to the visit and the commitment. This has been a little bit different. It's not like you can just bring a guy in for a visit who's playing overseas. I guess you could, but in this sense, we're just kind of piecing things together on the back end with folks with international player connections in terms of putting this one together. And we've stopped short of saying, this is a foregone conclusion, this is going to happen. We've been able to do that with previous situations in Arkansas Razorback basketball recruiting, John Calipari. We're getting closer though, because we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to, yesterday we talked some about Arkansas adding Houston, going to play in Madison Square Garden in New York City. Calipari dropped that news at his father-daughter camp over the weekend. So we're going to talk more about not only the Houston and Duke part of the non-conference, and while we wait on the SEC part of it, we know Arkansas is going to play Florida and Auburn, so you're going to play all four of last year's Final Four teams. So I'm going to go through some of the players that each team has and what those matchups might look like, and even some preseason rankings for these teams. It's pretty heady stuff when you go in when you're looking at the schedule next season, combining some of that stuff. One of the comments came over, and I missed that. It looks like it said Cal took pictures with at least 1,000 fans. I guess over the weekend at the. I don't know if he had 1,000 people at that camp, but maybe at the games. I know he was at the games. Okay, that's cool. I mean, Cal does that. It's so funny because, when I cover these live eval events the last 2 years, and I've been at both that Cal's been at in May, Adidas 2 years ago in Texas, and then just a few weeks ago, Memphis for the Nike EYBL. And I said this, with all the Division I head coaches, some of them household names, some of them going to be Hall of Famers if they're not already, like Bill Self, one that is, multiple others, just so many. And he's the one guy where it's not only other coaches, but it's players and their families are there. And these families are coming up to him, family members, kids, parents, the other coaches. I mean, it's like lopsided how much attention he gets relative to the field, including some other, again, household type of names and coaching. He's a magnet for people, to people. And, again, he's the Hog Father. He's the best to ever do it in recruiting. All right, so we're getting derailed a little bit. I'm glad the comments are flowing in. And then I meant to talk a little bit of 2026 recruiting, just a couple of updates. Yesterday, we didn't get to it. So let's get right into Egor Ryzhov, 6'11", 220, 225, forward out of Russia, forward center. I think he's a 4'5". We've been talking about it for several days, going back to the beginning of the weekend, starting Friday. And really, if anything, there's momentum picking up to the idea that this is about to be inevitable, potentially, that he's going to be a Razorback. So I've got a third source now with the international connection, someone that's plugged in, a third source now telling me it looks like Arkansas is about to get a public commitment announcement. So we were at 2, now we're at 3. So that's the update today. Just that I've got another one. And, again, this is someone who's plugged in with the goings on with the international stuff. And remember, the information I've given the last few days, talking with the staff, be ready for something coming soon. Could be, without fully signing on to the international thing, just, could be an international player. That's what was shared. And with this specific player, when I brought up the name, it was a no comment, or there was no comment, to affirm or deny. And this staff has been pretty adamant about denials and wanting those denials out publicly on situations in the last couple of months with portal players and players they're really not pursuing. And so you would think that there would be some level of, pushback if this weren't something that's happening. It's not a direct indicator of a fact that it's happening. I'm just saying we're just looking at the track record and the kind of the history and its recent history to read a little bit between the lines. I mentioned yesterday speaking with the player's agent who's out over in Russia as well. And he did make a comment, which was to say no comment. And he made comments about other things, talking about the player, his client as a player, for example. But the no comment thing, again, my experience is, and I mentioned this yesterday, if a school has been involved and they're no longer involved, or they kicked the tires, or they reached out, whatever level of investment, agents typically want that mentioned. They'll acknowledge that. Or if they've never heard from the school, they'll say, we haven't heard from them. Because a no comment to me means that usually means that something's either wrapping up and ready to go public, or maybe they're still not quite there yet and working on it. But you give yourself, plausible deniability by just staying off the record with that stuff. But again, with agents, it's usually they'll include a Calipari recruiting their player, if in just about any other scenario that you can imagine. And so that's where we're at. We're still in these things, continue to check on the paperwork part of it. Still haven't got anything there in terms of the procedural stuff at the U of A. So that's where we are with Igor Ryzhov. It's just one more voice saying it looks like it's going to be Arkansas. Now, I haven't talked to anybody. I've talked to sources that aren't sure, that they don't really know anything about it, other than they're hearing the same thing, but they don't have any direct information. And I haven't talked to one person or source that said, no, this isn't going to happen. This is misinformation. I haven't had one of those. So bake that in as well to what you think is going to happen here. But I think it's interesting in the sense of, you got a guy that's going to turn in late August, I think. We talked about that. We talked about the need positionally with more depth on the front line overall. He's a 4-5, primarily will probably split duties with Trevor Brazil at the 4 spot, with TB being your focal point there, and this guy plugging in with some playing time and depth. And I was asked, I think it was on my Pig Trail Nation segment yesterday, I was asked about just kind of project a role if this is the addition in terms of minutes, other than just being depth. What does that look like minutes wise? And I blurted out, probably 12 to 15. I'm still in that range until I learn more, and we got to wait to see if this lands. I mean, it's still, until it's official, anything can happen, and we see weird stuff happen at the last minute in recruiting, especially with NIL out there, and it's happened in several of the storylines we've had talking Razorback recruits since Calipari's been here. It's been, more than a couple, so you just never know. But it's looking more and more like this is going to land. But I do think when I look at the 4 guys, now if this happens, that means you've got 2 6'10s listed on the roster right now that go 230 or more pounds. You've got another 6'11 on the roster now, Malik Ewan. They got listed at, I think, 6'11, 230, 235. And this would be 6'11, 220, 225 if you add Ryzhov. So you're starting to get a feel with your 4 deep there on the front line. You got 4 guys that can play the 5. You've got a couple that can play the 4 and will play the 4 primarily. And so you're getting all kinds of versatility in terms of that kind of depth. But we said it yesterday, you're also going to have a bunch of lob threats and rim runners, guys that can, flush it. You say, well, a 6'10", 6'11 guy and playing at this level can flush it. No, I'm talking about, that's a big part of what they do. It's a big part of what they do. We know that with Trevor Brazil. When you look up and see he's got 11 or 12 points and 9 rebounds, you probably got a putback dunk in there, a fast break dunk, and maybe in somewhere else you've got another one, sprinkling in a couple of 2 or 3 threes the way he was playing at the end of the season. I mentioned it yesterday, Malik Ewan with over 50 dunks last year at Florida State. Nick Pringle, an SEC force in the paint over the last 3 years, a guy that's going to get, going to flush some down. And this guy, when you look at his highlights, Ryzhov, it's kind of that Adu Thero, catch, whether he's out high or at that free throw line extended at the elbows, catch, rip, and get downhill and get to the rim and dunk it. That's the majority of the highlight stuff. And so you're getting that kind of bouncy, big, strong deep front line now that looks a little bit like Florida, which we're going to talk about that matchup here in a little bit, because we're going to shift into the fact that Arkansas, now that we know about Houston in Madison Square Garden, we've known about Duke on Thanksgiving Day in Chicago. And those two teams met up in the Final Four, and Houston flipped the script in the last minute. What looked like certain Blue Devils to the championship game became certain Houston Cougars to the title game. We know Florida won it all, and we know Auburn was the team that Florida beat again, and that was in the Final Four. And so these are all teams Arkansas is going to play. So we're going to get that in a little bit. But I think just to wrap up on Ryzhov, this is something, again, we've been told an announcement will come soon. And if something goes south on this for any reason, I still think Arkansas's in the mix with enough for other international players. We've talked about Mika Mirnan in a reclass. There are other international players that, at least two more, that have been, by the source over a week ago when I referenced this, that told me there are other national bigs that Arkansas is involved on. One of the names was shared that I can't share, still don't have a green light for that, and a name that wasn't shared with me that I keep trying to get, hold on to as well if it ever matters. But I think there's other stuff in the works if for some reason this doesn't happen. But this seems like it's more and more momentum toward, it's likely pretty much wrapped up, and it's now about timing about how they want it to go public. So we'll see. All right, 11 plus minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm Kevin McPherson. That's the update today. Just another source in terms of Ryzhov, another source saying it's Arkansas. Let's move into the fact now that Arkansas is playing the entire field of the 2024-25 season Final Four that wrapped up in April, right? Early April. We know what went down. Arkansas was a few, non-choke plays away at the end, if you want to say it that way. Taking care of business at the end against Texas Tech and moving on to an Elite Eight, got to the Sweet 16. Blew a big lead late. Let's not relive all of that, but let's go ahead and acknowledge and say that you're playing the entire Final Four field. And just recently, John Rothstein, I think every week he updates his of CBS Sports college basketball analyst. You know who it is. I think weekly. I think maybe every Friday or Saturday he updates his preseason. I guess we can still call it way too early. We're still in early June, but he updated his top 45. He goes that deep with it. I like that, actually, because he's pretty thorough with the lineups. And, he's not perfect, but he gives a lot of info. But he's ranked, his updated rankings that came out just a couple of days ago or whatever, are the ones I'm going to go with today in terms of how we're going to, when we say rankings for these teams for this coming season, we're going to start it that way and go from the highest rank down, not how they finish in the Final Four matchups, in other words. So let's start with Houston. Number 2 is how Rothstein sees it coming into the season. So the second ranked team in the country, according to Rothstein, and they, one of the big things, all eyes were for Arkansas, for Carter Knox in the NBA draft process. Well, it was the backcourt player, started his career at OU, matched up against Arkansas in those games in Tulsa before OU was in the league, Milos Uzan, who was a big part of what Houston did last year, obviously, to get to the title game. But he came back. He returned to Houston. Kelvin Sampson's got more returnees, Emmanuel Sharp, another perimeter stud on that team, JoJo Tugler, Ramon Walker. And then he's got 3 5-stars. This is not typical so far for Kelvin Sampson at Houston to get to load up with the 5-star potential one-and-done guys. And we remember that 3 5-star one-and-done class that Eric Patrick Melsman had at Arkansas toward the end of his 5-year run in Fayetteville, and how up and down that was a little bit. But, the season ended right with a Sweet 16 run. But 3 5-stars, when you look at Chris Sinak Jr., who visited Arkansas, we knew he took a visit. McDonald's All-American, one of the, arguably the top big man. If you look at a guy out, maybe, you say Carlos Boozer, maybe it's, the Boozer twins. Carlos is the dad. I've gone Cam Boozer, excuse me. You could say it's him, and we'll talk about him because he's obviously going to be at Duke, and Arkansas is playing Duke. But arguably the top big man out of the loaded 2025 class in Sinak Jr., Kingston Fleming's a guard that Arkansas also recruited. At one point, the Hogs were on his Final 5 list out of Texas, 5-star point guard. Isaiah Harwell, who you don't hear as much about had some really good games in the All-Star circuit, McDonald's, Nike Hoop Summit, Jordan Brand Classic. I can't remember exactly what game, and he had his moments. Another wing player, another 5-star guy. So it's Houston's replacing some key guys, in some out of the backcourt, but they're also got good retention and they've got good newcomers in the mix. And so this is a game in your non-conference schedule. Are they going to squeeze that in somewhere in November? Will they play it sometime in December? They played the Madison Square Garden game last year in early, I guess it was the 10th or the 11th, so technically early December, and that was part of the Jimmy V Classic. I think that field's already been announced. I don't think it'll be that, but they play other one-off or other two-game event type things there, in that venue aside from the Jimmy V Classic. So let's just see how that shakes out. And again, this was Calipari confirming this matchup. We knew he'd been talking about a game in New York City and returning to Madison Square Garden. He talked about it since that game against Michigan last year. But to drop the bomb against Houston, that's a mega matchup. We kind of went through some of that yesterday. So that's the second ranked, according to Rothstein, the way he sees it now, coming into the next season, a team that made it to the title game and was runner-up, so finished second. The defending national champions, Florida Gators, he's got ranked fourth. And we know once we get the matchups, we won't get all the details on the SEC games like dates, we won't get the playing dates or times or TV stuff initially. But what the SEC typically does first is they just roll out the matchups, the home, the away, and then the round robin, which is home and away. That's how I phrase it. People now say home and home. I like home and away. I don't know why they changed that. But Florida, fourth, according to Rothstein. And we know they've replaced basically their top four rotation in the backcourt, but they got their top four rotation back on the front court. It was a damn good one. And it was, you could say it represented half of what made that team so good last year. I still think the backcourt was maybe slightly better than that in terms of if you were trying to, put a percentage on what mattered most. It all mattered. But I think that backcourt maybe drove things a tick more. I think in college play, especially, guard play does, especially when you get in the postseason. But they got a lot of studs in that front court. Getting Alex Connon back, Tommy Howell, the guy that's got the weird haircut but got a lot of bounce. He just attacks the rim, whether he's driving to it or going after offensive rebounds. All these guys do the way they play. Chinyelu back, as is Hanglotten, who missed a good portion of last season and came back late, but they're four deep there. And so if you're adding, going back to Ryzhov, I love the matchup because Arkansas, we just went through some of the positives of being a four deep and with all that size and athleticism and bulk. These guys aren't, rail thin. Even TB looks like he's added even more mass to that 6'10". They're listing him at 235. Okay, well, that gets it done when you look at those measurables. But that front line is back. Let's just say it quickly. Boogie Fland, an all-league caliber guy, proven before he went down at Arkansas, in the mix out of the portal. Xavier Lee out of the Ivy League. I think Princeton, another highly rated portal player, backcourt guy, to replace. You're talking about Walter Clayton Jr., Elijah Martin, Will Richard, Denzel Aberdeen, who transferred to Kentucky. So you're replacing your top four guards again. That's going to be tough. But that's how you start with Fland and Lee. I think they'll be in the starting lineup. They've also got a young guard out of the high school ranks. Wasn't rated as highly as some of the names we talk about all the time, but that 2025 class is loaded. And I saw Alex Lloyd play in person multiple times spanning his junior and senior seasons of high school. Keep an eye on that freshman guard. 6'4", really good skill and craft as a ball handler, as a shooter. Keep an eye on him. They've got Urban Klobuchar, about 10 minutes per game off the bench last year, international player, so he's been with Florida for the season. That's retention. He's back. Ohio transfer A.J. Brown, another guard, 6'4". So they've got to solve the backcourt. They've got good pieces here, but you just never know until you see it. And again, the front court's loaded, but Rothstein has fourth ranked Florida. Now, when the SEC matchups come out, I'm going to be I'm going to be fascinated by who are the home and aways, because last year, 2 years ago, before you added Texas and OU, you had 5 of those. 3 of them were like permanent, supposedly, and then you rotated 2 more. But you added those 2 extra teams. You grew your league from 14 to 16. And last year you only had 3. And Arkansas kept the Missouri and LSU round robins home and away, which they've had for multiple years. And they dropped A&M and added Texas. So does that mean that Texas is a permanent home and away? We're going to find out. I don't think anything's been solidified in terms of the SEC says this is what it's going to be moving forward. Are they going to rotate one? And which one is it if they rotate? Again, the LSU and Missouri round robins have been kept in place for years. So I'm not 100% sure on how all this plays out. I said all that to say, if you're going to rotate some of this, it leaves open the possibility that a Florida could be a home and away. However, since Arkansas hosted Florida last year, if this is another one-off, it looks like Arkansas will be on the road playing in Gainesville. So, Houston's at a neutral site. That's away from home. New York City, Madison Square Garden. You're going to have your hands full there. Then Florida, at minimum, is going to be, you're going to be playing in Gainesville. Even if it's a home and away, obviously you're playing there. And if it's not, you get them once, you're on the road. So unless the SEC does something weird and lets Arkansas host another game there, I would be shocked by that, but who knows? But I just think it's, most likely a road game there. And then if you do get them at home, that probably means you got the 2 games. All right, number 9 on the list is the Duke Blue Devils, a team that, basically let a championship opportunity slip away in that semifinal game against Houston. Credit Houston, but Duke had to do some Arkansas-like things that Arkansas did against Texas Tech late. There was some of that in the mix that cost the Blue Devils and Cooper Flagg his opportunity to, not only be the number 1 pick, but be a guy that's helped a team win a title at the college level. Notification. Let's see if I can get to that. I will have to go. All right. So I don't know if that got us to pause or not. Just got my paperwork guy on the U of A end of it. Still no new updates. I'm giving you a live bit of intel. We're checking all the time to see if Egor Ryzhov or anybody else is going through the formal process, formal paperwork process going through the U of A. Latest update is nothing so far. So again, I think with Kareem Artel, the other international player that Arkansas added a few months ago, when he's on campus, obviously his back end paperwork stuff was different. There was more layers to it, and it took maybe longer. So it doesn't necessarily mean anything to read into, but at the same time, we're checking it because that's an avenue that we have to check. All right, but getting back to Duke, you have the Boozer twins. I mentioned it. Cam Boozer, he's been rated the number 1 player in 2025, top 2 or 3, depending upon the service. Did some really good stuff in the All-Star circuit after the season. I wasn't fully impressed with some of the stuff he was doing in the McDonald's All-American game. He was highly impressive in the Nike Hoop Summit, and I think he was also in the Jordan Brand Classic. His brother, Caden, a borderline 5-star, top 25, top 30 lead guard who is an outstanding facilitator. They both are just cerebral, really smart players, solid freshmen. They've got another McDonald's All-American coming in Nick Kamenia, because they lost more than Cooper Flagg. They've lost other players. They're going to, be first rounders and projected even some lottery picks outside of Cooper Flagg being projected number 1. But the Boozer twins and Kamenia are kind of and then also Dame Sarr, who they've added just recently, who's also going to be a high level, top-notch freshman. So when you look at Arkansas's freshman class, it's impressive. It's a top 5 ranked class. Well, Duke's is ranked even higher. Arguably the number 1 class. Maybe some think Houston is. Arkansas's top 3, 4, or 5, depending upon the service. With guys like Darius A. Cup Jr., Malik Thomas, even Isaiah Sealy, I think ranked in the top 70 in at least one venue, or one service, excuse me. But that's a lot of talented freshmen. The team last year relied on multiple freshmen, Con Knipple, in addition to Cooper Flagg and some others. and they're loading up there. But some of the backcourt keys and returnees, Caleb Foster and Isaiah Evans. And there's some other players in the mix with Duke, but Duke and Rothstein has them at number 9. And we know Arkansas in Chicago, another neutral site on Thanksgiving Day. Last year, the Thanksgiving Day neutral site game was in Kansas City, and that was Illinois. The New York City game in Madison Square Garden was the Jimmy V Classic against Michigan. So now we're starting to see this start to fill in. It's starting to fill in terms of not only your non-conference, but the fact that by 2 non-conference games and 2 league games, you're going to play all of last year's Final Four. And that's kind of what we're focused on now. The 4th and final team on this list is another SEC foe, Auburn. Rothstein has the Tigers ranked 15th preseason. All right, so simple math tells you all 4 of last year's Final Four, they're all strong programs to be getting that far, but they bring guys back or reload, and they're top brand, top shelf programs. So you got all 4 ranked top 15, a couple of them in the top 5, 3 of them total in top 10 when you count Duke at 9th, and now 15th ranked Auburn, again, according to Rothstein's update. Auburn got, again, out of the NBA draft process, got Tahad Pettiford, really talented guard in the mix on the SEC regular season champs. Got him back. Stayed at number 1 for most of the season, the Auburn Tigers did. Kevin Overton, who Arkansas faced against, who played for Texas Tech out of the portal, did some good things in that NCAA tournament run, and for that season for Tech, which was probably right behind Houston when you looked at the Big 12. Kansas started the season preseason number 1. So we take all this stuff with a grain of salt, especially in June, but still, these are strong programs, a lot of good players. Kevin Overton, Abdul Bashir, who was going to do a Zoom call with Arkansas, and that didn't happen to mid-major gunner from 3 at 6'9", shoots a ton of threes and shoots it at a high clip. Bashir is part of Auburn's process this next season, part of the roster. Keyshawn Hall, who we know Arkansas was heavily involved with early, and he kind of got off the board early to Auburn. Keyshawn Murphy, just transferring within the SEC, frontline guy that played at Mississippi State and Chris Jans last year. So Keyshawn Murphy moving over to the Plains and going to play at Auburn. Caden Magwood, he was kind of a back-end top 100 high school guard who I got to see play multiple times last year on the circuit, and he always stood out to me. He teamed up on Team Loaded Virginia with a name you're familiar with, Nate Ament, and they were kind of a 1-2 punch on a talented team on the Adidas circuit. But Magwood caught my eye more than once, and I even tweeted about him. Keep an eye on this guy. We don't ever know how it's going to translate to the college game immediately, or if it takes later. But just keep an eye on this guy. It's one of the names that I've, we'll look at here, and Auburn's obviously got other players, but you start talking about it's the same talking point with Auburn that it was with Florida in terms of SEC schedule. Do you get a round robin by chance and home and away? No. Well, you played at Auburn last year. I think that was obviously, it was definitely in February, but that was part of a back-to-back A&M Auburn. You had your chances to win both and blew it. Against 2 really good teams, by the way. But Auburn, then, if you're having a one-off, you're probably hosting that game in Bud Walton Arena. So, and at minimum, again, if that's what it would be at minimum. If you get the round robin, it'll be home and away. But let's just for now say that you're only going to get Florida once and Auburn once. That means out of the entire Final Four field last year, you're getting 3 away from home and 1 at home. That's the most likely way that would land. Houston at a neutral site, Duke at a neutral site, in Gainesville for Florida, home at Bud Walton Arena for Auburn. So that's what that looks like. By the way, the other big name non-conference opponent Arkansas has is traditionally a big name, only 5 seasons removed from a national title, the Baylor Bears. Rothstein has him in this latest update as his last ranked team at 45th. Remember, it's a top 45. We will be similar to last year. Free throws. Yeah, we'll talk more about matchups and what the strengths and weaknesses are. I just kind of wanted to give an idea of where these teams are ranked, and not just say that, but what are their pieces? Why are they viewed? And we went through the strengths and some of that with the individual players. We'll definitely talk more about how they match up, and we don't really know yet what all the weaknesses and strengths of these teams are, and we may think more about that. But 45th is Baylor. So this is a team that's, that would be the weakest if that's anywhere near what the quality of that team is. And if that's a home game and it's a team that's not going to be anywhere near the top 30, you just hope it's good enough to be a quad 2 win. With Baylor, you got to think it will be. I'm not trying to over dramatize that, but 45th really. And when you look at what Baylor did in the offseason, it's not all that great in terms of their roster build. I agree with, maybe with the sentiment that they're a little lower down. But that's a team also in the non-conference part of it, so that Rothstein acknowledges in the top 45. So just throwing that in there. All right, we're just over 30 minutes in. We're going to wrap up pretty quickly with some recruiting stuff. It's not a lot here, but we've been talking more and more about in-state Jacob Lanier, class of 2026, 6'5", combo guard. I think he's really a 2. I think that's his strength. That's his superpower is shooting. He has got a smooth stroke, but he's got a little craft to his game. He's got plus arm length. I don't know what it is. I'd like to know what it is because he's got plus arm length, but just a silky smooth score, and he's got a good floor IQ. He's a high IQ player. He is not a pounder with the basketball. So in other words, he's not a ball dominant, everything runs through him kind of guy. So the more he advances, I think the more better his opportunities get because the quality gets better, and you're matched more and more with coaches whose jobs are on the lines and they're trying to get a team and not just a collection of individual players doing their own thing. And a lot of times until you get to these points, a guy like Lanier, you look at it statistically sometimes because, man, he's really efficient. I saw some good stuff, but it's not game in, game out where sometimes the ball dominant guys aren't just putting up crazy numbers. That's what I was saying with that. But we recently talked about him again, and I've said for a while when I updated, Arkansas maintains tabs on him. He may not be a priority in a loaded 2026 class at the top, especially with a bunch of 5-star guards and wings that Arkansas has been on, and it continues to recruit. And we'll update one here in a second. But he's not in that group. But they continue to keep that relationship and maintain tabs. Well, we talked about even recently, he just wrapped up at Pango's All-American camp for the second straight year. For the second straight year, he performed well enough to be invited to the top 30 cream of the crop All-Star game, the top players based on performances through the weekend camp. And then for the second consecutive year, he got one of the 2 MVP awards for that game. They give an MVP for each team. He had a really efficient game, 18 points, only played 15 minutes. But I think he was he didn't miss much. I think he missed one shot. He was 4 or 5 from 3, made both his free throws. I think he was 6 or 7 overall, but 18 points. Lanier was co-MVP. So that's back-to-back years. That's never happened at Pangos where you've had multiple. And you've had guys go back for multiple years. Christian Collins, a top 5-rated 5-star that Arkansas is recruiting, has offered and is talking an Arkansas visit in the fall. He was in Pangos, for example. A lot of other high-level guys. So we've talked a little bit about some of that, but what I haven't talked about, and I broke this news, a source told me that Auburn has jumped out with an offer. Now he's got a few high major offers. There's some SEC teams that have been on him. But speaking of Auburn, Auburn has now offered him a scholarship. While he was in Las Vegas, he went ahead and took an unofficial visit to UNLV. He was out there. We reported that as well. But the big news in the last few days is that Auburn offer. I can now tell you, it's a little nugget of intel for recruiting, that Arkansas has stepped up its efforts with Jacob Lanier. And remember, Lanier played freshman and sophomore seasons at Maumelle, then started out at Arizona Compass Prep with Mika Murnin last year. Then he transferred to DME Academy mid-season. He's back in Arkansas, back in the 501, going to be at Little Rock Parkview for his senior season. But the Arkansas coaching staff, via phone calls, tech, whatever, that has picked up. That has increased. That activity has increased. So let's just keep our eyes open. Let's see what happens. Let's follow that. We'll continue to monitor that. It doesn't mean that they're prioritizing him. I would not shift it into that gear right now. But it's picking up some momentum in terms of, the contact and the interest. Let's say it that way. And real quick before we sign off, we're about 35 minutes in. Tyron Stokes, the number 1 player in the country, so he's a 5-star, 6'7", native of Louisville, out on the West Coast, Notre Dame High School out there in California. We know he's talking Arkansas visit. He visited Louisville last year, where he's from. He had that Kansas visit. He had planned a mid-May visit to Kentucky, and that got postponed. Well, the update is he took that visit over the weekend to Kentucky. He took that official visit. So that's out of the way. We know Arkansas, Oregon, and Gonzaga are the other teams that he said or is on record. I think it was with Paul Biancardi that he intends to visit. We've had sources for a while. We told you that it was likely Arkansas and Kentucky would be among the next group after Louisville and Kansas to get visits. And sure enough, that's corroborated by that reporting a few weeks ago by Biancardi throwing Arkansas's name in there. Now, look, when that happens, we'll see. Could it be something they squeeze in soon? Remember, I told you a lot of Arkansas's visit patterns are the fall for football season and even beyond into basketball season, with the exception last year being Darius Akev Jr. coming in May. So it's not impossible to sneak someone in, get someone in during, it's kind of hit and miss with some of the dead periods the next couple of months, the live eval sessions, players are busy, but you can still, there are little pockets, which we've said before, that you could bring someone in. So let's keep an eye on Stokes. Is there a fast track for that? Is it something that happens later? Is it something that happens at all? Again, the guy at 6'7", you can call him a wing. I don't think you hear about positionless basketball. This is almost one of those guys, when you look at it backcourt, I mean, he could be your primary lead guard. 1 through 3, he can defend it all and he can play it all. And he can even help defend on some frontline guys for bits. I mean, he's strong, he's athletic, and he's smart, and he's good, and he's talented, and he's skilled. He's number one for a reason. Love the player. So we'll see, but that's the update. He did take that official visit. All right, we're nearly 37 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. If we get we're on Egor Ryzhov, or looking that way now on commitment watch, and we're going to come back live and talk more about him. We've talked a lot about him, but we're going to do more on that once it becomes official. If it becomes official, I'm never absolute 100% on anything, so I have to leave the wiggle room that maybe it goes a different direction, but it's looking more and more like that's where it's headed. Again, we appreciate you being here. If you haven't hit subscribe, like, or share already, please do it. Signing off, Kevin McPherson on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. Until next time, whether that's later today, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I either have to go really late or really early. So we may be doing an early AM, 5:36, something like that, if not later that evening. But until next time, thanks for being here, and we'll see you soon.